So I don't know. I continue to use yeast. I'll continue to yeast. What can I say that? All right, welcome back to the channel for part 2 of this series that I kind of did where we're digging into the weeds. You saw part 1 where we just talked about primary and secondary fermentation. You're missing it.
I am? Oh, that was one. Just one.
But today, we're talking about this, yeast. Let's just get into this video and show you the differences and how to handle your yeast in winemaking. And make sure you're liking and subscribing up above or down below. And follow us on Instagram, HowToDoneRight, link below.
Get wilder, we could get a little wilder. Take some clothes, but leave our phones. It's better with someone than it is alone. Let's get
Now there's all kinds of different yeast that you can use. My favorite is Red Star. There's another one out there, Lavlin, that I know everybody uses. This is the one that I stick with because it never fails me. I love it. I love Red Star. Again, I got links to this in the description. But do you remember we started those 2 batches? We got the strawberry and we got the banana wine. And we're going to show you how we add the yeast and go over some facts about this. All right, now you see this. This you don't want to use. This is bread yeast. Unless you want your wine to taste and smell like bread, don't use this. I know I get a lot of questions on it because I have it around. Make sure you're getting a good yeast, a wine yeast specifically. Now, a lot of yeast is in your fruits. Here we got some apples and bananas. Grapes have yeast. They are known as wild yeast or natural yeast. And not to mention, a lot of your wild yeast have some bad organisms in that you want to avoid in winemaking. So, bottom line is, don't use wild yeast, especially if you can get the good kind like Red Star. I know this because so many of you comment about they're just using the yeast that's in the fruit, the natural yeast, but that can cause all kinds of problems. Number one, you're not going to be able to get the ABV as high as you might want to get it. If you want to get to a 12 or 13% ABV, the yeast in your fruit is not going to get you there. I know everybody wants to do it the way they used to do it and the ancestors used to do it, but I like to think we came a long way from 1,000 years ago. This stuff is made for wine. It's not going to fail you. It's more temperature tolerant than a lot of the yeast in your fruit. You got to be in a specific range in temperature. This thing will go down to like 40 degrees all the way up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It will never fail you like a natural yeast will. Now, another thing that's very important, when you get to adding your yeast to your wine, you've got to make sure it has food to bloom and it will like expand. And you've got to feed that. And one of the best ways to do it, you've seen me do it in all my wine videos, I add a yeast nutrient like this. This is very good to feed your yeast and give you a healthy bloom. But believe it or not, there's a lot of easier ways that if you can't get yeast nutrient, such as make a strong cup of coffee like this and pour it in there. You make it dark, strong, put a couple of tablespoons in there, and that will also help you feed your yeast. Believe it or not, I've read this one also works. This is tomato paste. You put one of these little cans in one of your wines, and apparently the yeast loves this. I don't know if I want the tomato flavor, so I'm not going to try this one. Other great options to feed your yeast is such things as lime juice or lemon juice. That works great. Also add 1 cup of raisins to your batch. That will also work to feed your yeast. They love raisins. Or you can just make your own. Do you remember I said about this bread yeast, don't use this? This has another purpose to feed your wine. Let me show you how you do it. So here we go. I got a little saucepan going and I got about a half a cup to a cup of water in here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this bread yeast, open it up, and dump everything in here, just like this. What we're trying to do basically is kill this yeast. We're gonna boil this water for exactly 15 minutes, and then we're gonna turn this off and let it cool to room temperature. There you go, we're starting to get a boil here. Set your timer 15 minutes. Alexa, set timer 15 minutes.
15 minutes, starting now.
And there you go. We just made homemade yeast nutrient. And I'm actually going to use this. We're going to let it cool to room temperature. I'm going to use this for these 2 batches of wine. So there it is. That is homemade yeast nutrient. We just made that from scratch. I don't know. Is it a money saver? I don't think so. This whole thing is like $6 or $7 for the yeast nutrient, but I know some of you can get the yeast a lot cheaper. I don't know. I'll probably just continue to use yeast nutrient because that's a little bit easier than doing all this extra stuff. But for now, that's what we're gonna do. I got everything sanitized. We gotta get this stuff in here. Our banana and our strawberry wines. Let's get them open. Oh my goodness, smell that banana. Now I got my sanitized paddle. What we're gonna do is you wanna make sure you're keeping your fruit moist. Remember, when we add this yeast, we added those additives 24 hours ago. You have to wait 24 hours before adding yeast to get those additives to work a little bit. Now, what I'm gonna do, you didn't see me add the additives, but I'm gonna add some of this food for the yeast. This is the stuff we made. You want 1 tablespoon per batch or 1.5. This one over here is a pretty big batch. You can't overfeed your yeast. It's gonna love this stuff. I'm gonna put about a 1.5 in this big batch like that. So now all we're gonna do is stir that mixture we made up of that homemade yeast nutrient, get our fruit moist like this, and we're gonna add our yeast. This one looks really good. All right, now it's time to get our Red Star in here. This 1 pack will usually work for anywhere from a 3 to 6 gallon batch. So this is a 3, this is a 5 gallon batch. So I'm gonna put a pack in each one. And all you wanna do, just sprinkle it in wherever you see wine. I've never had it fail doing it this way. Let's get the other one open. And if you could smell this banana wine, this is gonna be fantastic. But we're doing a special on this thing. We're gonna make this into a couple different batches. You gotta stick around and see that. So there we go. That's 1 pack. We're gonna get them sealed back up and we'll wait 24 hours. I guarantee you this thing's gonna be bubbling and going crazy. And that's it, no need to stir this. And make sure you got your airlocks filled to the proper level. There's a line in there and this one says max. So again, that's key during fermentation. This is what you wanna see from your bubbler. That yeast is tearing into that yeast nutrient. These things are just getting started. It's only been 24 hours and they're already bubbling. Let's get them open up so I can show you what this looks like inside. Look at all that foam. That's the strawberry. This looks incredible. And I guarantee you, you're gonna see the same thing on this banana. Make sure you're stirring this each day for the first couple of days because this yeast needs oxygen. This banana's foaming too. It's a lot more fuller. This is far from done. These are still very active batches of wine. So let's just wrap up this yeast video with a couple of the tips and tricks I told you. Number 1, we all know you need yeast to make wine, so make sure you're picking a good one. You all know I love Red Star. I can only give you my experiences from using Red Star, but when you pick one, stick with it because you're gonna know the ins and outs of it as you go through the fermentation process. And when you're picking a yeast, make sure you're looking at the tolerance, the alcohol tolerance, because some of them have a broader range than others, like the Red Star. I think that one you can get up to an 18% ABV, and temperature also plays a role. So some of the yeast strains are only going to be able to work in certain temperature range. So if you're in a hot climate, you don't want to use a yeast that might only work in a cold climate. Number 2 tip, make sure before you add your yeast, you put those additives in and you wait 24 hours before you add your yeast. You're going to want to stir that yeast for the next 3 to 5 days or when it starts to slow down. That's what I do, because your wine needs that oxygen in the primary fermentation stage. Number 3, don't rushing your primary fermentation. You want the yeast to work in there. And when it starts to slow down with your bubbler between 30 and 60 seconds, test it for your specific gravity with a hydrometer. You're shooting for a 1.000 specific gravity. And what that means is all the sugar has been converted to alcohol. Number 4, make sure you're feeding your yeast. Whether it's a yeast nutrient or the homemade yeast nutrient that I made with a packet of bread yeast, feed your wine because a healthy yeast is going to produce a healthy wine. Keep your yeast happy. And number, what am I on, 5 or 6? I don't even remember. But remember, make this hobby fun. That's what it's all about. Experiment. Make different fruit wines. Because after you see some of my videos, you're going to say, now that sounds great. I'm going to make it. And put your own twist on them. Until next time, I hope you liked the video. Continue to watch this series as we dig into the weeds of a lot of this. And I can't wait to show you the next one because it's going to show you about when is fermentation done. How do you tell? Now all I'm going to do is stir this yeast nutrient. Make sure our fruit... What the hell is going on today?
Get wilder. We could get